The Battle of Okinawa, the final and bloodiest battle of the Pacific War. In the early months of 1945, the Second World War had already raged for more than 5.5 years, and in the Pacific theater, the United States and its allies had been fighting a brutal island-hopping campaign for nearly 4 years. The capture of islands such as Guadalcanal, Tarawa, Saipan, and most recently Iwo Jima had brought the Allied forces steadily closer to the Japanese home islands. Each victory had been costly in lives, equipment, and effort, but the momentum was firmly on the side of the Allies. It was in this context that the decision was made to capture Okinawa, the largest of the Ryukyu Islands, located roughly 350 miles, 560 kilometers, from Kyushu, the southernmost of Japan's main islands. The operation was given the code name Operation Iceberg, and it would prove to be the final major battle of the Pacific War, as well as the bloodiest. Okinawa was more than just another step on the map. It was a critical prize for strategic and logistical reasons. Its size, about 70 miles long and up to 7 miles wide, meant it could host large airfields and anchorages. From these, the Allies could stage the massive invasion of Japan's home islands, an operation then scheduled for late 1945 and early 1946, known as Operation Downfall. The island's capture would also cut Japan off from resources coming from the south and bring the American bomber fleet within easy striking distance of Tokyo and other key targets. For the Japanese High Command, Okinawa represented the last defensive barrier before the home islands themselves. Losing it would leave Japan exposed to direct assault, and for that reason, the Imperial Japanese Army prepared to defend it to the last man. General Mitsuru Ushijima, commander of the Japanese 32nd Army, was tasked with the defense of Okinawa. Unlike some of his predecessors in earlier island battles, Ushijima did not plan to defend the beaches with heavy forces. He had studied the defeats at places like Saipan and Iwo Jima, where Japanese soldiers had been slaughtered by overwhelming American firepower in frontal defenses near the shoreline. Instead, Ushijima ordered his troops to dig in deeply inland, making use of Okinawa's mountainous terrain, limestone ridges, and an extensive network of natural caves. These positions were connected by miles of tunnels, underground bunkers, and fortified artillery sites. By forcing the Americans to fight for every ridge and hill rather than confronting them on the beaches, Ushijima hoped to bleed the Allied forces so heavily that they might reconsider invading Japan itself. The defending force consisted of about 77,000 Japanese soldiers, reinforced by nearly 20,000 Okinawan conscripts and Home Guard militia. Many of these Okinawan fighters were poorly trained and equipped, but Japanese commanders expected them to fight and die alongside the regular army. In addition, thousands of civilians were mobilized for labor, supply, and medical work, blurring the line between combatant and non-combatant. The Japanese also prepared a ferocious aerial campaign in support of their ground defense. The kamikaze attacks. These suicide pilots, flying both Army and Navy aircraft, were instructed to crash directly into Allied ships, using their planes as guided bombs. The kamikaze campaign would prove to be one of the most destructive naval assaults in history. On the Allied side, the operation was commanded by Admiral Raymond Spruance, head of the U.S. Fifth Fleet. With overall land operations under Lieutenant General Simon Bolivar Buckner, Jr., the ground forces of the U.S. 10th Army included both Army divisions and Marine Corps divisions, amounting to more than 180,000 troops. Supporting them at sea was an immense fleet of over 1,500 ships, ranging from battleships and aircraft carriers to destroyers, landing craft, and supply vessels. In addition to American forces, a contingent of the British Pacific Fleet, including aircraft carriers and other warships, would provide support, though the bulk of the fighting on land would be done by U.S. troops. The preliminary phase of the battle began in mid-March 1945. 4 days before the landing, American and British ships bombarded Okinawa's coastline and inland areas, while carrier-based aircraft struck airfields, shipping, and military installations throughout the Ryukyu Islands. The aim was to weaken Japanese defenses and prevent reinforcements from reaching Okinawa from nearby islands or from the Japanese mainland. The Japanese responded with early kamikaze raids, targeting the Allied fleet before it could deliver its troops to the beaches. These attacks sank and damaged several ships, providing a grim preview of what was to come. On April 1, 1945, Easter Sunday, the main amphibious landings took place. This day became known as L-Day, the Pacific War's equivalent to the D-Day landings in Europe. Under the cover of naval gunfire and airstrikes, the U.S. 10th Army came ashore on Okinawa's western coast at Higuchi beaches. To the surprise of many, the landings were almost completely unopposed. Soldiers and Marines quickly moved inland, capturing key objectives such as Yantan Airfield and Kadena Airfield within hours. Some Allied commanders were initially puzzled, suspecting a Japanese trap, but the truth was simply that Ushijima had deliberately left the beaches undefended, conserving his strength for the inland battles he had prepared so carefully. In the first 2 weeks of April, the northern part of Okinawa was secured relatively quickly. U.S. Marines advanced up the Motobu Peninsula, encountering only pockets of resistance. By April 20th, the north was firmly under Allied control, and attention turned to the central and southern portions of the island. In central Okinawa, American forces made rapid progress across the flat farmland, but their advance soon ground to a halt as they approached the Japanese main defensive belt, the Shuri Line. The Shuri Line was a series of interconnected defensive positions stretching across the width of the island, centered around the ancient fortress of Shuri Castle, which served as the Japanese headquarters. The terrain here was a defender's dream and an attacker's nightmare. A maze of ridges, ravines, and fortified hills. The Japanese had dug artillery and machine gun nests into caves, with hidden entrances and interconnecting tunnels that allowed them to shift troops unseen. Every approach to the line was covered by overlapping fields of fire. The battles for ridges such as Kakazu Ridge, Sugarloaf Hill, Horseshoe Ridge, and Half Moon Hill became epic struggles in their own right. In early April, attempts to storm Kakazu Ridge failed with heavy casualties, as Japanese defenders emerged from hidden tunnels to counterattack after surviving massive bombardments. It became clear to the Americans that only relentless pressure, combined with artillery, tanks, flamethrowers, and close-range infantry assaults, could dislodge the defenders. Meanwhile, at sea, the Japanese launched the first of their great kamikaze offensives, known as the Kikyusui, floating chrysanthemum, waves. Beginning on April 6th, hundreds of suicide aircraft dove into the Allied fleet, sinking destroyers, landing ships, and even damaging larger vessels. These attacks were relentless, continuing for weeks and forcing the Allies to devote immense resources to air defense. One of the most dramatic episodes came when the Japanese battleship Yamato, the largest warship ever built, was sent on a one-way mission to Okinawa with only enough fuel for the journey there. Before it could reach the island, Yamato was spotted and sunk by U.S. carrier aircraft on April 7th, taking most of her crew with her. As the battle for the Shuri Line dragged on into May, the weather turned against the attackers. Heavy rains turned the battlefield into a quagmire, making movement difficult and turning foxholes into muddy pools. Yet the fighting continued, often at ranges so close that grenades and flamethrowers became the weapons of choice. On May 29th, U.S. forces finally captured Shuri Castle after weeks of bloody combat. The fall of the castle forced the Japanese to withdraw further south, establishing new defensive positions near the island's tip.